Dump him. I don't care what happens to him anymore. Those words were spat coldly through the crack of a rusted car window, followed by the hollow thud of a battered collar hitting the dirt. The man didn't even look back. The truck's engine growled, and just like that, it vanished into the early morning fog. Left behind was a trembling dog, ribs jutting out like the bones of a forgotten skeleton, fur caked in dried mud and old blood. His eyes searched the road, tail stiff with confusion, as if waiting for the punchline of a joke too cruel to be real. The outskirts of Millersville were quiet that day. No passers-by, no second chances, just broken fence posts, dried fields, and a barely moving wind. The dog stayed near the same patch of gravel for almost 2 days. Every time a car passed, he'd perk up, eyes desperate, only to lower his head again when it didn't stop. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He just waited for someone who was never coming back. On the 3rd day, hunger overcame loyalty. He limped toward the highway's edge, ribs groaning with each step, but collapsed before he reached it. His breath was shallow, eyes glazed. He might have died right there, invisible to the world, had it not been for a girl named Nora. Nora wasn't supposed to be driving that road. She'd missed her turn an hour ago and was late for work already. But the flat tire had slowed her down, and frustration had sent her rerouting through the countryside. As she crested the hill and coasted down the curve, she caught something in the road, shoulder-shaped, as still, too out of place. At first she thought it was roadkill, but as she slowed down and rolled closer, she saw the shape move, a slight lift of the head, a twitch of the tail. "Oh God," she whispered, pulling over and throwing her hazard lights on. She approached cautiously, hands out, heart pounding. The dog didn't flinch. He didn't move at all, save for his eyes, which barely opened to meet hers. There was no resistance, no fear, only resignation. Nora crouched beside him, tears springing to her eyes. "You poor thing," she whispered. "What did they do to you?" There was a moment when she thought he was gone. But then, with the last of his strength, he nudged his nose weakly against her wrist, as if to say, "Please, not again." She didn't hesitate. Using her jacket as a makeshift sling, she lifted him gently and laid him in the back seat of her car. He made no sound, just closed his eyes and let go, finally surrendering to whatever came next. At the Millersville Animal Hospital, the staff moved fast. IV fluids, blood work, careful trimming of fur, and cleaning of infected wounds. The vet, Dr. Harlan, shook his head quietly. "He's lucky she found him when she did. Another 12 hours, he wouldn't have made it." "What should I call him?" Nora asked softly. Dr. Harlan looked at the way the dog's body trembled even in sleep, the way his legs twitched as if running from ghosts. "Call him Lucky," he said, almost sarcastically, but Nora shook her head. "No, he's not lucky, he's brave." She decided to name him Bruno. The next few days were a blur of soft blankets, slow meals, and quiet healing. Bruno didn't bark, didn't whimper, but he opened his eyes more each day. He began to track Nora with his gaze when she entered the room. He flinched at sudden sounds, but not at her voice. Her voice, gentle, steady, became his anchor. By the end of the week, he was strong enough to stand. By the 2nd week, he took his first steps out of the kennel. But the moment that no one expected came late one evening. Nora sat by his side, cross-legged on the tiled floor, reading quietly aloud. A soft rain tapped against the windows, and Bruno's head lay in her lap. Suddenly, without warning, he whimpered, not from pain but from something deeper than. A single tear slipped from his eye. Nora froze, thinking it was her imagination, but then came another. He turned slightly, resting his paw on her arm as if to say, "You stayed. You didn't leave." That was the night Nora stopped being his rescuer. And became his reason to hope again. Bruno's recovery was not a straight line, though the weight slowly returned to his fragile frame and his fur began to regain its shine. His soul moved slower than his body. Every step forward was marked with hesitation, like a soldier afraid of hidden mines. Nora noticed it all the way he avoided mirrors, startled at closing doors, and flinched at raised hands, even when they were offering nothing but affection. At night, he whimpered in his sleep, low and heart-wrenching sounds that echoed memories no one could see. She stayed with him during those hours, curling a blanket beside his bed, whispering soft reassurances into the dark like someone trying to heal a wound that medicine couldn't reach. One rainy Thursday, a delivery man knocked too loudly at the clinic's side entrance. The sound echoed down the sterile hall. Bruno had been lounging quietly at Nora's feet, enjoying a moment of calm, when the knock sent him into a full-body tremble. His ears flattened, and in a flash, he dove beneath the desk, wedging his body into a corner, eyes wide with raw panic. Nora knelt beside him, heart breaking all over again. "It's okay, baby. It's just a noise, just a door." But Bruno wasn't in the present. He was in that truck again. On that gravel, waiting to be left. Again that night, Nora stayed later than usual, sitting cross-legged with a piece of chicken in one hand and an old photo album in the other. "You know Bruno," she said softly, flipping through childhood photos of her old dog Jasper. "He was scared too when we brought him home. Different kind of scared, but it still counts." She placed the album on the floor near Bruno's bed. He sniffed it curiously, then rested his head on the page, showing a younger Nora hugging Jasper beneath a tree. It was the first time he'd shown interest in anything beyond survival. By the end of the third week, something changed. Small things. The way Bruno would follow Nora from room to room, the way he wagged his tail just a little when he saw her car pull up, the way he allowed a few of the vet techs to scratch behind his ears without freezing. But the biggest shift came when a man entered the clinic lobby looking for a new companion. A man named Oliver. Oliver had recently lost his golden retriever to cancer and had come in hoping to connect with a new dog, not to replace, but to rebuild. When he saw Bruno, there was a pause, a silent recognition. He knelt slowly, saying nothing, letting Bruno approach on his own terms. Bruno didn't run, he didn't hide. Instead, he walked forward, cautious but steady, until he was close enough to rest his head on Oliver's knee, just like he had done with Nora that first day. Nora watched from behind the counter, tears brimming in her eyes. She wanted to smile, but something twisted in her chest. She had saved him to give him a second chance, but letting go was another kind of heartbreak. Still, she walked over and joined them. "He likes you," she said with a soft laugh, trying to mask the tightness in her throat. Oliver looked up, eyes glassy. "I haven't felt this in a long time. It's like he sees the parts of me I don't show anyone." The next few days were full of gentle introductions. Walks around the clinic, short car rides, quiet afternoons in the park. Bruno was hesitant but willing. He trusted Nora's presence enough to follow her judgment, and she watched closely, tracking every flinch, every moment of connection. Then came the twist neither of them expected. One morning, as Nora opened the clinic's email inbox, she found a message flagged urgent. It was from a shelter 2 towns over. They'd seen photos of Bruno online, and someone recognized him. A volunteer had seen him during an abuse case nearly a year prior. A backyard breeder had been shut down, but not all animals had been accounted for. Bruno was one of them. They included documents, photos, everything matched. Bruno's history had a paper trail, and it wasn't just abandonment. It was documented cruelty, isolation, neglect, the kind of report that made you feel ashamed. To be human. Nora sat back, her hand over her mouth. Suddenly, every flinch, every tear, every silent whimper at night had context. Bruno hadn't just been abandoned, he had been discarded again and again. A product, a leftover, not once a pet, never once loved. She debated telling Oliver. Would it scare him off? Would the weight of Bruno's past feel like too much? But when she did tell him, later that evening, Oliver just sat quietly, hand resting on Bruno's back. "That just makes me want to protect him more," he said. Bruno nudged his nose against Oliver's arm. That was the moment Nora knew she'd done her job, not just as a vet tech or a rescuer, but as a bridge between suffering and something better still. Saying goodbye wouldn't be easy. She spent one last evening with Bruno in the garden behind the clinic. A quiet dusk fell around them, and Nora leaned back against the fence while Bruno lay beside her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was just supposed to save you, but you reminded me what it means to fight for someone." Bruno looked at her, and for the first time licked her cheek gently, then rested his head in her lap. Tomorrow he would go home with Oliver, but tonight he was still hers, and for both of them that was enough. By the time Oliver officially began the adoption paperwork, the air between him and Bruno had shifted from uncertainty to something deeper, something rooted in mutual healing. Yet the closer they got to the adoption day, the more Nora found herself waking up in the middle of the night, unable to shake a strange tension building in her chest. She tried to dismiss it as the usual ache that came with parting from an animal you've nursed back from the edge, but this felt different. It wasn't sadness, it was dread. And it wasn't until 3 days before Bruno's departure that her gut proved right. The shelter volunteer who'd first recognized Bruno from the photos paid a surprise visit. A wiry woman in her 50s. She introduced herself as Maeve, her eyes sharp and tired. After a few formalities, she pulled Nora aside and lowered her voice. "I didn't want to say this over email, but I think there's something off. The man who ran the backyard breeding ring, he was never caught. He skipped town before the authorities arrived. I only recognized Bruno because I used to sneak food to the dogs in the back, late at night." Nora frowned. "But they shut the place down. You said that in the report. They shut down the property, not him. He vanished, and no one followed." A silence stretched between them. Then Maeve added, "He had a tattoo on his wrist, faded but distinct, 3 bars, vertical black ink." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She sat on her living room floor, laptop open, sifting through every document, every adoption form, and eventually she found it. Oliver's emergency contact was listed under a different name, Jay Hartley. Her heart thudded in her chest. Clicking through public records, it didn't take long to piece together the horrifying truth. Jared Hartley, alias Oliver Mendez. Last known address connected to an animal. Cruelty investigation in 2019. Charges dropped due to lack of evidence. Disappeared months later. Reappeared now here, and somehow he had gotten close to Bruno again. Nora's hands trembled as she shut the laptop. Bruno had trusted Oliver. She had trusted him. And now, The man who had likely been the source of Bruno's deepest traumas had found a way back into the dog's life, wearing a gentle voice and kind eyes. The thought made her sick. She rushed to the clinic before dawn, just to see Bruno. He was sleeping peacefully, curled in the warm blanket she'd left the night before. For a brief moment, she hesitated. If she was wrong, she could destroy a second chance. But if she was right, she couldn't let history repeat itself. Bruno stirred, lifting his head slightly when she sat beside him. His eyes were soft, trusting, and that was what broke her. That trust. Nora gently stroked the fur along his back. I won't let anyone hurt you again. She cancelled the adoption immediately. No ceremony, no goodbye. She sent an official notice to the state, forwarded her findings to animal control, and called the local police with everything she'd uncovered. Oliver or Jared never returned her messages. 2 days later, officers confirmed he had fled town. What followed was a whirlwind of disbelief and bitter relief. Bruno didn't understand why Oliver never came back, and for a few days, he became withdrawn, quiet, confused. He sat by the front door for hours at a time, tail still, staring. But Nora stayed with him. She didn't try to replace what he'd lost again. She just waited. Waited like he had done once before. Except this time someone stayed. Then something beautiful happened. One morning she found him in the break room, with one of the new interns, a nervous young man named Luis. Bruno was lying on his back, belly exposed, letting Luis rub his chest as he snorted softly with approval. It was the first time he'd opened up to anyone since Oliver. The staff began calling him the clinic's guardian spirit. Every time a scared pet came in, a kitten trapped in a storm drain, an anxious pit bull left in a crate, Bruno would sit nearby, calm and watchful, as if silently telling them, "You'll be okay." I've been there. Months passed, and with each one Bruno grew into more than just a rescue. He became a symbol of endurance, a quiet force in the clinic's rhythm. And slowly, gently, he began to live like he believed he deserved love. Real love. It was during one of the spring open house events that Nora noticed something new. A little girl, no more than 6, was sitting cross-legged in the grass, brushing Bruno's coat with a plastic comb. Her parents stood nearby, watching with a mix of awe and disbelief. The girl was blind, Nora learned later, and yet Bruno responded to her like she was made of light. He leaned into her touch, carefully shifting his body to give her access, eyes closing in pure contentment. After some time her mother approached Nora. She doesn't usually connect with animals, but he just sat beside her like he knew exactly how to reach her. That evening, as Nora watched Bruno lay peacefully in the little girl's lap, she realized something. Bruno wasn't waiting to be adopted. He already had a home. It just wasn't one with papers or fences or names written on a form. It was with the people who walked in broken and walked out braver. The ones who came in looking for help and found hope, curled up in a corner with big brown eyes and a gentle soul. And maybe, just maybe, that was Bruno's purpose all along, to prove that even the most shattered hearts can learn to beat again when someone finally chooses to stay. The days after the open house were quieter at the clinic, but something had shifted in the way people moved around Bruno. He was no longer the dog with a tragic past. He was something else, gentle, composed, steady. Clients who had never heard his story began calling him the therapy shepherd. No one told them to, it just happened. A mother with a foster cat, too scared to come out of its carrier, noticed her kitten crawled forward only when Bruno was near. A teenage boy, fresh from a breakup, cried into Bruno's fur without saying a word, and all the while, Bruno remained still, present, giving more than any of them realized. But Nora still hadn't decided his future. Her initial plan helped Bruno heal, find the right home, had been derailed by betrayal, heartbreak, and a sobering truth. Not every adopter deserved a second chance. Bruno had learned to trust again, and Nora couldn't afford another mistake. She began to wonder whether placing him in any home was right. Maybe this was it. Maybe Bruno belonged here, where his past didn't need to be explained, and his presence meant more than words. Still, not everyone shared her hesitation. The board of the clinic had recently updated policies, including a push for finalized adoptions. Shelter space was tight. Donations were thinning. One morning Nora found a note taped to her locker, polite but pointed. Bruno's case must be resolved by end of quarter. Please prepare final adoption documents or release. Her chest tightened. She sat with Bruno that afternoon under the sycamore tree behind the shelter. He rested his head in her lap, his breath slow and warm against her palm. They want me to let you go, she whispered, but I'm not sure I can. That weekend, another application came through. A retired teacher named Ruth, soft-spoken, lived alone. Her letter wasn't long, just a few paragraphs about her quiet house and garden. But it ended with a sentence that stayed with Nora. I don't want to fix him. I just want to walk beside him. She invited Ruth in on a Monday. Bruno was cautious, as always, but there was no panic, no cowering. He let her sit beside him, and though he didn't lean in like he had with the little girl, he didn't pull away either. Ruth didn't rush. She didn't speak in a high-pitched voice or offer treats. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, and waited. The second visit went better. Bruno took a few steps forward. On the third, he licked her hand. Nora stayed up late. That night, She had always believed healing took time, but maybe sometimes healing took choice. Bruno had chosen her once, and maybe now it was time for her to choose something harder, to let him walk forward without her. She packed a small canvas bag with Bruno's favorite blanket, a toy he never played with but always carried, and a simple Polaroid of the two of them beneath the clinic's oak. She clipped on his leash that morning, feeling every second as though it were a goodbye. She wasn't sure she was ready for. Ruth lived in a cottage surrounded by ivy and roses. A gate creaked when they entered. Bruno sniffed the air, alert but calm. Ruth opened the door and crouched slightly, smiling with open palms. Bruno didn't hesitate. He walked in, stopped halfway, turned back to Narand. In that moment, something passed between them. Not fear, not longing, just understanding. You brought me here. You stayed when no one else did, and now I'll try. Nora stayed for an hour, but when she left, Bruno was already curled up on the back porch, eyes closed beneath the warm morning sun. Weeks passed. Ruth sent updates. Bruno was eating well, following her through the house like a quiet shadow. He'd barked once at a passing squirrel and wagged his tail when a neighbor's grandchild stopped to say hello. Ruth wrote, "He doesn't need to be anything more than what he already is." And I think he's starting to believe that. One night Nora received a letter in the mail, not typed, handwritten, in gentle, slanted cursive. Inside was a photo of Bruno sitting in the garden, surrounded by fallen leaves. The back of the photo read simply, "He no longer waits by the door. He naps by the roses." Nora smiled, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. She had once believed that rescuing Bruno meant fixing what was broken, but she had been wrong. Rescue isn't fixing, it's witnessing, it's staying. It's standing beside someone even when they can't look you in the eye. It's choosing not to give up, not because it's easy, but because the one you're saving has something left to give the world, even if they don't know it yet. Bruno had given his, in the quietest, most powerful way, and in the garden of an old teacher's home. A once broken dog was finally whole. They said dogs forget, that their memories are short, instinct-driven, reactive. But what was happening now, what Nora saw in Bruno's eyes, wasn't forgetfulness. It was forgiveness. The first few nights at Ruth's home had been quiet, not silent, but heavy, as if the house itself was waiting to see if Bruno would unravel or rest. Ruth never hovered. She gave him soft spaces, gentle words, and a rhythm that didn't ask for anything back. She read aloud sometimes, not for him, but with him. And though Bruno didn't understand the stories, he understood tone. He understood presence. On the 7th morning, Ruth opened the front door and found Bruno sitting there, not to escape, but to watch the sunrise. She sat beside him with her tea, and for a moment they simply shared warmth. A few days later, when she accidentally dropped a pan, he flinched but didn't run, and that night, for the first time, he climbed onto the blanket she'd always laid out beside her bed, curled into it, and sighed. What he didn't know was that across town, Nora still checked her phone every morning, waiting for the updates. Ruth sent photos of progress, tiny victories: Bruno napping under a fig tree, Bruno sniffing at a child's rain boot without fear. Ruth's final message before a long weekend trip was simple: he's not just surviving anymore, he's becoming someone new. But the past has a way of creeping in when no one's looking. That Monday, a man showed up at the clinic, tall, sunburned, and slurring slightly. He claimed he had lost a dog, a shepherd, good boy, real loyal, and had reason to believe he'd ended up there. Nora's chest clenched before he even said the name. Bruno. She kept her voice even. "That dog was seized by animal control 7 months ago. You were contacted. No one came." He scratched his stubbled chin, eyes narrowing. "Things got complicated. I wasn't well. You left him to die behind a shed." His voice rose. "He's mine. I want him back." Nora stared at the man who once chained a living creature beneath a collapsing roof and walked away. She had to fight the burn in her throat. "He's been adopted," she said finally, "by someone who treats him like he matters." He leaned closer. "You don't get to decide that. But the thing is, she did, and she already had." 2 days later, she visited Ruth unannounced, needing to see it for herself, to be certain she'd done right. When Ruth opened the door, Bruno came forward slowly, not cautiously, curiously, his ears perked, tail giving a tentative wag. Nora dropped to her knees. "Hey you," she whispered. "I heard you've got a fig tree now." He licked her cheek once, then stepped aside to let her in. That afternoon, they walked together through the garden. The world was soft, golden with late sun. Ruth sat on the porch steps, watching them, and for the first time, Nora truly let go of the past. Bruno had taught her something she hadn't expected to learn, not just about healing, but about letting others write their own endings. When it was time to leave, Bruno didn't whimper or pace, he just watched. As Nora reached the gate, she looked back. He was standing next to Ruth now, head tilted, ears high. "You okay?" she called softly. Bruno blinked once. Then he sat. That was his answer. Somewhere out there, the man who'd abandoned him might tell himself he was just a dog, that it didn't matter, that dogs don't remember. But Bruno did. He remembered the cold, the hunger, the feeling of being invisible, but he also remembered hands that didn't hit, voices that didn't shout, blankets that smelled like lavender, not smoke. And for the rest of his days, that's what he would carry. Not the chains, but the freedom, not the fear, but the peace of being loved and never left behind again.